Good day, everyone. By the way, I am Miss Maria Choi T. Pombo, and I will be your discussant for this session. This time, I will be presenting my topic, which is cultural identity. So, what is cultural identity? Cultural identity usually refers to one's sense of belonging towards a particular culture or ethnic group. So, this belonging can be justified with a shared set of companionship, principles, or beliefs of living. So, cultural identity is formed in the process that results from membership in a particular culture. It also involves learning about and accepting the traditions, heritage and language, religions, ancestry, aesthetics, thinking patterns, and social structures of society. So when a person identifies with their culture, they often embrace traditions that have been passed down through the years. So the cultural identity reveals the person's heritage as well as help identify with others who have the same traditions or similar belief or system. So examples of cultural identity includes anything which the person is associated within a cultural group that often related to race, religion, ethnicity, gender norms, beliefs, and traditions of the culture. In other words, cultural identity is made up of the multiple pieces that influence an individual's personal identity. So it is a critical piece of our personal identity that develops as we absorb, interpret, and adopt or reject the beliefs, values, behaviors, and norms of the communities in our lives. So our cultural identity can evolve as culture is ever evolving and dynamic. And while there are people who progress through life without ever thinking about their cultural identity, it is something we tend to become aware of when it is challenged. So this typically happens when we find ourselves in parts of the world or among groups with different cultural norms. So our cultural identity is important because it influences how we interpret and react to such situations, which can affect how successful we are in life. Now let us discuss the formation of cultural identity, which occurs in 3 stages. So the first stage is the unexamined cultural identity, in which in this stage it involves a lack of interest in cultural issues as a result of taking one's own cultural characteristics for granted. So the unexamined cultural identity occurs during childhood when culture is taken for granted. So the cultural ideas and values provided by families or communities are easily accepted without much critical thinking. So say for instance, a young children lack awareness of cultural differences. Then we have the cultural identity of many European Americans has remained largely unexamined because of their perceived normalcy. Second stage, we have the cultural identity search. So this involves a process of exploration and questioning about one's culture in order to learn more about it. So in this stage, an individual or a teenager may be more curious and willing to explore and compare their beliefs with other cultures. So they might ask, who am I? Where do I belong here? What is my culture like? So when people develop a clear sense of cultural identity and know which social group they belong to and feel satisfied with their cultural identity, there comes the third stage of cultural identity, which is the cultural identity achievement. Cultural identity achievement involves the acceptance of oneself and an internalization of one's cultural identity. So when people live in a particular country, they can easily acquire their cultural identity through exposure to different aspects of their native culture. So these particular people inherit their ancestors' language, beliefs, values, and norms, which have been passed from one generation to the next. Now, what defines and shapes a person's cultural identity? So anytime a group of people unites toward a common objective, a culture begins to form. No matter how large or small the group, there are beliefs, norms, values, and behaviors that emerge. However, our culture becomes complicated when many of these defining characteristics go unspoken. So the group unconsciously develops certain standards for what is normal and acceptable based on social cues. Then, through our continual exposure to the group, we begin to accept these standards as part of our cultural identity. So important parts of our cultural identity are shaped due to our affiliation with the number of groups or cultural patterns, some of which are our family of origin, race, local community, geography, gender, religion, sexuality, generation, physical ability, nationality, and language. Other contributions to cultural identity includes educational institutions, professional organizations, social clubs, online communities, political or special interest groups, and support groups. Now, let us discuss the aspects of social and cultural identity. As mentioned earlier, the important parts of our cultural identity are shaped due to our affiliation with any number of groups or cultural patterns, some of which are gender identity, spiritual identity, class identity, national identity, regional identity, personal identity, ethnic identity, religion, racial identity, and the last one we have education. Gender identity. Our gender identity is influenced by the way we are treated by our parents, other relatives, neighbors, and friends. So boys and girls are dressed in different types of toys. So in every culture, there are communications and interactions which are considered feminine, masculine, or androgynous. So nowadays, the media influences our identity in what is considered feminine, masculine, or androgynous. Spiritual identity. Depending on the culture and context, a spiritual identity can be more or less apparent. In some countries, people might even ready to die for their beliefs. So people's spiritual identity may even lead to conflicts or in worse cases, war. Another aspect of social and cultural identity is the class identity. Our social class influences how we behave and communicate towards other people. So a person's class identity is not necessarily noticed until he or she encounters another person representing another social class. National identity. From the word itself, nationality, it is the country that a person is born in or in the country that a person currently lives in. So our national identity determines cultural identity because the person adopts the culture of that country. So depending on the person, his or her national identity may be stronger than his or her ethnic or cultural identity and vice versa. Another aspect of cultural identity is the regional identity. So in every country, there are regions with which people identify themselves. So in some countries, regional identities are stronger than the national identity. So our regional identities may also carry positive, negative, real or not real generalizations about people living there. So this also influence our cultural identity. Personal identity. Personal identity refers to people's unique characteristics, which may differ from those of others in their cultural groups. It means how we perceived ourselves. So it is vital for us, and we communicate and negotiate that with other people. So that is also influence our cultural identity. Another aspect of social and cultural identity is the ethnic identity. Ethnic identity is derived from the sense of shared heritage, history, traditions, values, area of origin, and sometimes language. So it is the culture of the person and is a very crucial aspect of cultural identity, as the person usually has the culture of his or her respective ethnicity. So it influences our cultural identity because it also often helps identify the physical looks of the person. Now, we also have racial identity. So, our racial identity also influences our cultural identity because of a classification system which is used to categorize individual into larger and distinct population. And we also have religion. So religion, it is a set of moral beliefs and principles related to the existence of God and the world. So it contributes to the cultural identity by helping in determining the personal and moral characteristics of the person. So religions have throughout time which shaped by many cultures. The last aspect of social and cultural identity is education. Cultural identity has a direct impact on the way children perform in education. Say for instance, Asians are usually quiet in class and consider it inappropriate to make eye contact with the teacher. However, European children value active classroom discussion and maintain eye contact as it reflects their respect and engagement. So, education has also contributed to our cultural identity. Now, let us delve into the characteristics of cultural identity. So, here are some characteristics of cultural identity. First, cultural identities provide a framework for organizing and interpreting one's experiences of others. As being said, cultural identity is negotiated, co-created, and reinforced in communication with others when we socially interact. The second characteristics that cultural identities are central to one's sense of self, which is similar to our gender and race. So our cultural identity is our self-identification. So it is a sense of belonging to a group that reaffirms itself. And the third one, we have cultural identities are dynamic and change with one's ongoing life experiences. So this means that our cultural identity is dynamic and constantly evolving. So it covers the entire lifespan of a human being and changes every moment based on social context. And the last characteristics is that cultural identities are multifaceted, in which it is made up of the multiple pieces that influence an individual's personal identity. And this can be simultaneously a student, employee, friend, woman, daughter, and more. So those are the characteristics of cultural identity. This time, let us discuss the dark side of identity or the cultural biases, which includes social categorizing, ethnocentrism, stereotyping, prejudice, discrimination, and racism. Social categorizing. So this develops when people impose a pattern on their own world by organizing the stimuli into conceptual categories. And most people think that other people perceive, evaluate, and reason about the world in the same way that they do. And humans simplify the processing and organizing of information from the environment by identifying certain characteristics as belonging to a certain category of persons and events. Ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism occurs when the beliefs, values, and practices of one culture are viewed as superior to those of others. This said that all cultures tend to be ethnocentric. So to be a competent intercultural communicator, you need to recognize how your own culture influences your judgment of others and be aware of emotional reactions to such judgments to minimize their effect on your communication. Another dark side of identity is what we call stereotyping. Stereotypes are a form of generalization or categorization about a group of people. For instance, everyone fits into the same mold. So a stereotype is a specific belief or assumption about individuals based solely on their membership in a group, regardless of their individual characteristics. So it can be a positive or a negative, and when overgeneralized, are applied to all members of a group. For instance, the model minority stereotype of Asian Americans as highly intelligent and good at math can be damaging professionally and academically. That is according to Tritton et al. In 2012. So these beliefs are overgeneralized to all members of the group, even though many of the individual group members may in fact be struggle academically and professionally. So our groups can be stereotyped based on their religion, age, occupation, social class, geographical location, and many other characteristics. We also have prejudice. Prejudice refers to attitudes toward other people that are based on faulty and inflexible stereotypes. So this is common against people who are members of an unfamiliar cultural group. So one example of prejudice is having a negative attitude toward people who are not born in the United States. Although this prejudice or people holding this prejudice attitude do not know all people who were not born in the United States, they dislike them due to their status as foreigners. Another form of cultural bias is what we call discrimination. So the term discrimination refers to behavioral manifestation of prejudice. So it is prejudice in action. So discrimination occurs in many forms, from extremes of segregation and apartheid to biases in housing, employment, education, economic resources, personal safety, and legal protection. So discrimination is the unequal treatment of certain individuals because of their membership to a particular group. So these aspects of bias are related, but they each can occur separately from others. To sum up, culture is a defining feature of a person's identity. The shared values, customs, and histories characteristic of a particular culture have a strong influence on how a person behaves, thinks, and views the world. Cultural identity then encompasses all which relates to self, belonging, systems of beliefs, and sentiments of self-worth. Thus, cultural identity is an important contributor to today's society, not only because it provides a sense of belonging, but also because it defines who we are as a people within the community. So, identifying with a particular culture gives people with access to social network which provides support and shared values and aspirations. So I think that would be all for my presentation. Thank you for listening. God bless.